Okay, I know I typically talk about video games on this channel, but I recently watched something that I feel I need to talk about, and that's Netflix's film adaptation of Death Note. Death Note, for those of you who need a refresher, is the story of high schooler Light Yagami, who finds a mysterious notebook that allows him to kill anyone whose name he writes in it, and uses this as an opportunity to create his version of a perfect world by ridding it of all criminals that bring down society. However, his actions put him directly against the world's greatest detective, Elle, who believes these murders aren't just and in fact evil. This opposition creates a deadly game of cat and mouse where the two attempt to catch each other, and in doing so, prove their justice is the right one. There's no denying that Death Note is one of the most iconic anime of all time, and has been adapted multiple times in Japanese, so it's only natural that it would eventually get an adaptation over here in the West. When it was first announced that Netflix would be producing an adaptation of the series, I was fairly optimistic. There's no denying that anime adaptations have not been Hollywood's strongest suit as of late, but Death Note is a series that I think could be adapted into live action fairly well, since it's set in a realistic contemporary world and doesn't have too many outlandish concepts to worry about. Aside from the whole death god part. The thing is, depending on who you talk to, Death Note is either an engaging psychological thriller that touches on themes of justice and morality, or an over-the-top, dramatic, hot topic cheesecake romp. The Netflix adaptation, on the other hand, only seems to get that second half, and doesn't really nail the first part. There are a lot of changes that are made for the sake of adaptation that just don't work. Honestly, this film is probably one of the most frustrating yet laughable adaptations in recent memory. There's just so many missteps taken. But the question is then, what went wrong? How did we go from psychological thriller to this confusing train wreck? Well, come with me while I try to piece things together and maybe come to terms with this whole thing.
Shall we begin?
A couple of things before I get into it though. Firstly, I won't get into the whole whitewashing thing. I understand why people are bothered by it, but this is meant to be an American adaptation of Death Note, so it's natural that it is set in America and has American characters. It is supposed to be a new take on the story. If you want a perfect adaptation set in Japan with Japanese characters, there are a multitude of them to watch that are frankly more worth your time if you want something that stays true to the original. With that in mind, I will also try my best to avoid repeatedly comparing the film to its source material. It would be easy to complain about how it's not the same as the original, and they changed a bunch of stuff, like the fact that there's no potato chip eating scene whatsoever, but again, it's an adaptation, so it will of course deviate in places in order for it to be its own take on the story, and for it to fit in its new setting and culture. However, I will naturally point out where there are missteps taken in this version, as there are massive ones, and why those certain aspects were handled better in the anime. Now I will start out by pointing that there are good things done in this adaptation. As everyone has already pointed out, Willem Dafoe does an excellent job as the Shinigami Ryuk. When I first heard Dafoe was cast as Ryuk, I said, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, have you seen him in Spider-Man 2? Dafoe nails the sinister nature of Ryuk, and his raspy voice fits the design perfectly.
Hey kid, it's pronounced Ryuk.
I legitimately don't think they could have cast that one better. Another smart decision with Ryuk is rather than have him be a prominent character that makes a lot of appearances like in the anime, Ryuk is kept mostly in the shadows, keeping to his role as a spectator, which really builds the mysterious air around him and creates an intimidating presence in all the scenes he's in, which is only enhanced by giving him these piercing red eyes that shine in the dark. Plus, it makes it easy to do the CG if they don't have to fully show him in the light. Ryuk is also the character in the film that has stayed most true to his origins, being the one who passes the Death Note onto Light so that he can sit back and watch what happens. Though in this adaptation, he takes a much more active role in pushing Light into being Kira. But we'll get into that later. It's worth noting that the film's cinematography is also incredibly well done. You can quickly tell that the director Adam Wingard has worked on horrors before with how tension is built in scenes through the way shots are framed and the lighting is done. I would not have been able to watch this film twice to prepare for this video if it wasn't for the interesting camera work on display. However, the use of Dutch angles is definitely overdone, as there are shots that do not need it and makes me think I slipped into Battlefield Earth at times. Dutch angles are used to convey unease and tension to the audience, but when they're used too often, it just becomes the norm, meaning they lose their effectiveness and just make you start to tilt your head to compensate.
This is all so ridiculous.
Okay, now that I've said some nice things to show that I'm not too biased, let's get into the actual complaining. To start with one of the biggest problems, Nat Wolff does not know how to pull off a role like Light Yagami, now named Light Turner. The character still has the same overall broad strokes: teenager finds the Death Note, uses it to change the world, shenanigans ensue, but either Wolff isn't directed properly or he lacks the subtlety in his performance. He bounces from bored confusion to over-the-top dramatic and not in a fun potato chip eating way like we see in the anime. It just never feels consistent. When Elle taunts him on live TV, openly mocking Kira, Light reacts to Ryuk laughing as if he was a parent being interrupted while on the phone.
Just shut the fuck up.
However, when Light first meets Ryuk, he does this. I will say that I appreciate that most people would react in a similar way to how Light Turner does, but it is so overdone that it makes it impossible to take Light serious for the rest of the film. At the core of Light Yagami's character, he's meant to be cool, calculating, and confident, which is why you're invested in seeing what someone like him will do with the Death Note. But that is not how I would describe Light Turner. This is meant to be an American version of Light, and there are going to be some changes to show this, but you have to wonder what the director was trying to achieve by changing the character on so many fundamental levels to the point that it's impossible to see the original. Wingard clearly wanted this take on Light to be unique and fit his new setting, but in trying to make a Light that is more palatable to an American adaptation, they go too far in making him overly sympathetic. At the start of the movie, it's quickly established that Light is an angst-ridden teen, wants to stand up for the little guy who's being picked on, helps others with their homework, even if it's not finished, looks lovingly at his crush down the hall, and has a sense of justice driven by the death of a parent. If this is starting to sound familiar, it's because it's the same setup as Peter Parker in Amazing Spider-Man.
What are you doing here?
I work here. I don't work here. I was gonna say I work here, but it seems like you in fact do work here, so you know that I don't in fact work here.
I'm Mia.
Oh, hi. I know that you're me actually already. I already knew that.
I know that you're Light Turner. I already knew that.
Yeah. You knew that you know my name?
These parallels really show how far they went to make a Light that American viewers could sympathize with by giving him an almost superhero backstory. But in the anime, the character isn't meant to be a sympathetic character. Sure, he has goals you can sympathize with, but Light himself never really has a redeeming moment that makes you think he's a good guy, as he readily murders thousands. And much like Ryuk, the audience is just going along to see if and when Light gets his dues, or if he's gonna get away with it. Much like Frank Underwood in House of Cards, if Light Yagami was in any other story, he would be the villain. With the film though, the writers want to make you root for Light Turner and hope he makes it out safely, but this ends up lessening his turn into Kira. In making a sensitive, doe-eyed Light, there's zero edge to Wolff's performance that makes his giant leap to becoming the international killer Kira believable, which is why they needed Mia and Ryuk to be the ones to push him into doing it. I can believe he would be a supporter of Kira, as he has the teenage angst part down, but not someone that would actually do the things that Kira does. This person does not look like someone that could do this. The only time his motivation is believable or understandable was when he kills the person who killed his mother. That makes sense for this character. But when it comes to killing massive amounts of people, he doesn't have the cold, calculating demeanor or the passionate resolve to make his actions as Kira credible.
There's a guy in the news who killed a couple kids. I thought maybe we could make some popcorn, take some names down for later.
Going with the theme of changing character motivations, the only concrete reason that the film presents for why Light wants to be a killer of international criminals is that he wants to impress a girl, which on second thought might be the most believable part of this movie. Anyway, Mia is meant to act as the film's version of Misa Amane, but instead of Misa being an idol who admires Kira, wants to help Light achieve his goals, and frequently puts him in danger due to her incompetence, Mia is now an active partner of Light's actions as Kira, and frequently puts him in danger due to her incompetence. Actually, in this version of the story, Light is the more sympathetic and innocent of the two, while Mia is the one that is more goal-driven, reversing their roles from the anime. For example, Light is much more apprehensive when it comes to killing those that are investigating Kira, but Mia is ready to kill anyone who opposes the two of them, even if it's Light's father. I will admit that this role reversal is an interesting idea, as it puts the control in Mia's hands, allowing Light to be the doe-eyed innocent, but the thing is we never learn what her damage is and why she's a psychotic edgelord.
You don't have to lie to me. Kenny was a sociopath, and just because he's dead does not make it a tragedy. I just wish I'd seen it.
With Misa, there was an explanation for why she wanted to support Kira and help him fix society, as he was the one who punished the criminal that killed her parents. But in the film, Mia's just straight bloodthirsty, being weirdly interested about hearing the details of a classmate's brutal death.
I just wish I'd seen it. You know, I heard his head spun all the way around.
Oh, actually, his head exploded into a million pieces, in case you're wondering.
You saw it?
Mm-hmm.
One could argue that this is a commentary on America's views on violence and capital punishment, but I question if the writing is that clever when it includes something like this.
You put my name in it, didn't you?
It was only if you took the book, and I thought I could convince you not to take it.
Are you kidding me? Like,
You put my name in the book, I got mad, I'm taking it. You said you loved me, I thought you wouldn't take the book.
It's character writing flaws like this that made me realize how pivotal the inner monologues were to the anime and manga. Having a window into what the character is thinking gives a lot of insight into the characters themselves and how they're internally dealing with the situation while they maintain their outer appearance. With the film though, a lot of things have to be assumed, like why Mia thinks it's a good thing to kill anyone currently investigating Light, despite that being a huge red flag for the investigation team, or why Light has an issue killing Watari and not Elle. Having an inner monologue, even with just Light, could have added a lot to explain some of his irrational behaviors, and could have made him more closely resemble his original portrayal, whereas inner thoughts show what's going on in his head while he maintains his calm demeanor.
If you don't want to wind up on some kind of registry, I suggest you back the fuck.
Okay, maybe not calm. Yet another change that the film presents is that Light and Mia's relationship is more mutual this time around, a change that comes with making Light a more relatable character, as their relationship was extremely manipulative and one-sided in the anime. Mia is now a more prominent character in the story and is no longer simply a tool for Light to use, and that is an interesting change. However, the problem is that the chemistry between Light and Mia is almost non-existent. We're meant to believe that these two are partners in crime and really care for one another, but every scene they share is so dull and awkward, which isn't helped by the dialogue between them. Maybe this was on purpose since it's revealed that Mia had been playing Light to get her hands on the Death Note, so it could have been all an act on her part. And that could have been a cool twist on the Light-Misa relationship, putting Light in Misa's place as the one who's being taken advantage of. But then Mia explains that she does love him and she's only doing this in order to protect him from his inability to pull the trigger on the tougher kills. So she's just inconsistent. And even after Mia's turn on Light, resulting in him killing her, the film tries to end it as if it's a tragic love story like Bonnie and Clyde, but it just becomes an illogical mess once you take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Though, that arguably could describe most teenage relationships. This leads into another major flaw that can be seen throughout this film, and that is that both Light and Mia are easily the stupidest characters in the whole film. In the anime, Light is the top of his class in both high school and university, with a lot of his time spent studying, and he uses this intellect to outwit Elle and those attempting to catch him. With the film, we're told that Light is smart because he does people's homework, but there are no other clear examples of his intellect. And in fact, we get more evidence that he's actually rather dumb, like naming himself Kira because it means light in Russian. And the only reason that can't lead back to him is because Kira kind of sounds like killer in Japan. Yep, that is some sound logic. It is because of this stupidity that he and Mia are constantly acting against their better interests. For example, the first thing that Light does when he confirms that the Death Note works is to show it to Mia, which is possibly the most idiotic thing he could do. Even bringing this item to school is probably not the best idea. I understand that they were going for a kindred spirit angle, with both Light and Mia wanting to make the world better for those that are oppressed, but there is no reason for Light to think that she would be cool about something he used to control and kill someone. This isn't a superhero showing a loved one their superpowers, it's someone showing an almost complete stranger a supernatural murder weapon. Not every character has to be some kind of super genius, and allowing them to make mistakes so that they can learn from it is good writing. However, it becomes hard to relate to a character when they're constantly making illogical mistakes that are simply forgotten about or ignored. Speaking of intelligence, you might have noticed I haven't really looked at the Master Detective Elle at all, and that's because the film doesn't really either, as it focuses more of its time on Light and Mia's relationship, to the point that Light and Elle's relationship takes a backseat for the majority of the film, which might be for the better. The strength in Elle and Light Yagami's relationship is how well they play off each other, being a constant game of cat and mouse between geniuses where who is always changing, and it's this dynamic that keeps you invested. With Elle and Light Turner, however, it's more like watching a person playing a game of tic-tac-toe with a chicken. The chicken might surprise you, but it's greatly outclassed on the intellectual scale. In fact, it's not so much Elle's detective skills that lead to Light's downfall than it is Mia and his infighting for the Death Note. If anything, Elle is more of a roadblock for Light than an actual part of the story, since the only thing he does to the plot is points the investigation team in the direction of Light, thus causing the dispute with Light and Mia. This lack of strong conflict between the two not only makes the battle between Elle and Light weaker, but also lessens Elle's character in the film. Keith Stanfield is a great actor, as he's already proved in Get Out, and I can tell he's trying his damnedest to pull off a good Elle with the twitchy behavior, visual tics, and a love for candy, but I would argue that his attempt to perfectly imitate the Elle we see in the anime is actually a detriment to his performance. Yes, I'm saying that this version of Elle is too close to the source material. You see, when it comes to the anime, when Elle is being an eccentric weirdo, there's some suspension of disbelief because it's an anime, and there are other eccentric characters that balance out his personality. And watching this odd machine compete with a charismatic genius is interesting because of how they play off each other. The problem with trying to replicate this type of character is that when Elle is sharing a scene with others that are acting completely normal and mundane, it's really hard to take him seriously, and I end up thinking more Abed from Community than a master detective.
Cool.
During the third act, when Elle finally confronts Kira, Elle loses all his anime behaviors and becomes a much more grounded, realistic character. And I think this is when Stanfield's performance works best, as you see hints of Elle's character, but it isn't so over the top that it's distracting.
You're the one who flew into the sun. I'm just here to make sure you actually burn.
But probably the biggest flaw, and the one that's at the core of pretty much every other one, is that this is a film. Now that's not me making a snarky comment that it was a bad idea they even made the thing, but that making a full-length series into a film might not be the best idea. Cramming a lengthy, meticulously paced series like Death Note into an hour-and-a-half movie means that a lot of character and world building either needs to be sped through at lightning pace or disregarded entirely, and events are skimmed through that should have had time to breathe and allow the audience to absorb the subtle little details. For example, one of the most important scenes in the movie goes by so quickly that you might miss it if you blink. This problem with pacing isn't even exclusive to this adaptation of the series. Pretty much every attempt to adapt Death Note into live action has had this problem with trying to convert 25 20-minute episodes into a full-length movie, which results in the writers having to find what parts they can remove or shuffle around for the sake of time. The fact that all the rules are included in the Death Note in this portrayal shows that the writers knew they didn't have the time to show Light experimenting with it to see what he could and couldn't do with it. So they needed to find a quick way for him to know all the rules and easily convey it to the audience. Honestly, I think Netflix would have been better off if it instead made Death Note into an 8-episode season like it's done with the Marvel series it's produced. Not only would making Death Note into a full mini-series fix a lot of the pacing issues seen, it would allow it to flesh out its characters and ideas to a more satisfying degree. There are some interesting concepts that simply go unexplored, like how American law enforcement and even America as a whole would deal with the actions of Kira, because the film needs to focus on Light and Mia and wrap everything in a tight hour and a half. But stretching it out and allowing these ideas to be explored would have made an overall better story. Overall though, despite all my rambling criticisms, I can't really say I hated this film. It is frustrating for sure and has a lot of writing mistakes, like how Light can write Wateri's name in the Death Note when he only has his first name, but there are glimpses of what makes Death Note Death Note. There are still underlying themes of justice and morality, even if it's obfuscated by the teen romance plot, and there are some honest attempts at making the characters resemble their original portrayals. Plus, there are some scenes that are just hard not to laugh at. Despite what some may say, this is not Dragon Ball Evolution or Avatar The Last Airbender's level of bad. Actually, I think this would have been a much more interesting film or series if it was its own story about Ryuk passing on the Death Note to someone in America, and removed all the characters from the anime and manga so that new characters could be the focus and allow for new ideas to be expanded upon. This adaptation has a lot of trouble staying faithful to the original while trying to be its own thing, and most of the problems come from the disconnect between the two, resulting in this mediocre mess. Admittedly, Death Note is actually one of the anime young me would watch on Friday nights when all the cool kids were out partying, and it greatly influenced my tastes in later anime. So it's disappointing that this take on the story wasn't as good as it could have been. I wasn't expecting a perfect one-to-one adaptation, just something that had the same fundamental elements, which Netflix's take doesn't quite do perfectly, but it did try to, and that's worth something. Wow, that came off as a much longer rant than I was expecting. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this deviation from the norm on this channel. I have a lot of thoughts on anime, movies, and other things, so let me know if you like this different kind of video, or if I should shut up and go back to talking about the video games. If you're new to the channel and liked what you saw, feel free to subscribe if you want to keep up to date on new videos. You can also find me on Twitter at SuperFoxcade if you want to see some medium level shit posts and cute animal videos. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.